This is Photoshop from the ground up. I'm Peter Law, your host, photographer, and designer. Now, in this episode, we are going to look at how we can crop inside of Photoshop. This is sort of the next most basic adjustment. The crop tool lives here in the toolbox, and it lives right here. There's the slice tool and the direct slice tool that live in the same location, so if you don't see the crop tool, look for one of these two. So I'm going to select my crop tool. And you'll notice I've got a bunch of fields here in my options bar, but none of them have anything in them. And if this is the case, I can click and drag, and I can click on one corner of my image and drag to anywhere I want and set that as a crop. I'm going to press my escape key to get out of that. You'll also notice that I click, and if I hold down my space bar, without letting go of the mouse button, I can actually move the origin point of that crop. So if I started in the wrong spot, I can hold that spacebar key, then reposition it, let go of the space bar, and continue to draw out my image. You'll notice when I actually let go of a crop, what it ends up doing is basically creating a dark area around the rest of the picture so that I can kind of see what's going on. Now, I can actually control that right here. This is the color that shield is. The shield is the area that overlays the area that's being cropped out, and this is the opacity. So if I click here and I turn this all the way up to 100, you won't be able to see anything but the area that's being cropped away. I'm going to bring this back down to 75%-ish, whatever, doesn't really matter. And if I crop here, if I crop, it'll just cut off the portions of the image that I don't want. Now, here's another tool, a nice trick when you're dealing with the crop tool. If I click, say I select my whole picture, actually before I do that, I'm going to select values. So I'm going to say I want to take this to the lab and make a 4:6 print. Now, if I take the full resolution image to the lab, it will print just fine, but I can actually sharpen, which we'll get to later, but I can actually sharpen to the particular output resolution that I want to. So I'll actually get a better looking file if I have Photoshop doing the resampling, because I have more control over how that happens. If I take it to the lab is actually, their onboard software is going to handle the resampling. And I don't trust their onboard sampling. I like to do things myself. So I'm going to say I want 6 inches. And in this case, I can just type in IN. If I wanted to use a different thing like points or picas, I could put PT for point, P for pica, PX for pixels. I could use the quotation marks for inches. Photoshop understands a lot of that stuff. I'm going to go with 4, and I'll just use the quotation marks that time. And I'm going to come over here. Oh, it didn't work properly. We'll just go with 4IN. And then I'm going to come down to this resolution. Now, resolution, as I mentioned earlier, is the density with which the pixels are packed together and how they're arranged for printing. So in this case, I'm going to take this to a lab, and labs prefer a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. If you're going to print on an inkjet printer, you're probably going to go look at 200 to 240 pixels per inch. If you're going to a newspaper, you might go down to 175 pixels per inch or something like that. And screen, you can go down to 72 pixels per inch, but you don't really need to specify resolution because it's not printing, so it just kind of, it just displays the number of pixels you have. So I'm going to select my image, and I'm going to click, and you'll notice that the image got substantially smaller. And that's because Photoshop threw out all of those pixels. Basically, what I've done here is the same thing I could do with the image size command, only I've done it with the crop command. I'm going to undo that with Command Z, Control Z on the PC. That's under your edit menu. If I want to change the actual shape of the image, the crop is helpful too. Let's say I want to crop this to an 8:10. So I'm going to go, I want a width of 10 inches. I want a height of 8 inches. And a resolution again of 300. Now, an 8:10 is actually a different aspect ratio, meaning it's a little more square than a 4:6 is. So I drew this out, and you'll notice as I draw it, I'm not allowed to draw funny shapes. It will always maintain the same proportion of height to width. So I'm going to go to the edge of the document, and I'm going to reposition this, say, about here. And I click, and now it has actually cropped away part of the image and resize the image. So now this is exactly the size that I need to print to an 8x10. And I'm going to, again, edit, undo. And here's another little tip. If you want to, say, add some, a bar of color. Say I want to add a white bar at the bottom. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my background color here. In my toolbox, I have these. This is my foreground color and my background color. I'm going to click on my background color, and it's going to bring up this color picker dialog box. This slider here by default allows me to pick the hue, and if you don't see that, just click on this little H radio button right here. And then this axis and this axis are hue and saturation, our saturation and brightness. I'm just going to go right up to the top corner and set that to lightness. So now my background color is white. Or if I hit my D key at any point in time, aside from when I have a type tool active, I will get the default foreground and background colors, and white is the default background. And by the way, if you want to switch your foreground and background colors, you can just use this little arrow. And if you need to default them at any point in time, this button right here is actually the same as clicking the D key. So now I've got a white background. I'm going to crop my image, and it stops me right there. But now I just could pick it up and start cropping again. And when I crop past, and then I'm going to click on it, I have white filling the area that went outside of the picture itself. So if I wanted to write something down here, I don't typically do this because it's kind of dorky, but if you wanted to add, say, a matte to your picture, oftentimes you could say crop it, then crop it again. And what I'm doing is I'm holding down my option button, which means that I'm drawing my crop from the center, and I'm holding down the shift button, which constrains the proportions. But in this case, it's actually not necessary because this thing's constrained to an 8x10. I'm going to draw that up there, and I'm going to crop like this, and now I've got an image matte. So that's just another way of working here. Anyways, that is how we crop our pictures inside of Photoshop.